It is Wednesday, my dudes, which means it is time for another first thoughts and initial impressions video for Epic 7. This one will be on Unbound Knight Arowell. If you've been watching my videos for the past couple of months, you probably can already tell I'm pretty excited to talk about this one. When Arowell received her most recent round of buffs, the rework that she got a couple of months back or so, I thought that she was in a prime position to be very, very strong should she ever receive a specialty change. On top of that, when we did How to Play Adventurer Raz, I discovered that Arowell has the same base stats as Adventurer Raz, who is probably the best Arius holder, the best tank in the entire game. So Arowell was set in a very good position. So as soon as she got a specialty change, I knew she would probably end up being a very, very powerful character, assuming that that specialty change was good. Is it actually good? Well, let's find out in this video. Before we move on to the S3 animation, if you are new here and you do like this style of content, please consider leaving me a like or a subscribe. It does help the channel out here a ton. And with my shilling out of the way, let's move on to the S3.
I'm still searching for the path I must take. Don't ever ignore the power of someone who has something to protect. I knew hard work would never fail me.
Okay, in the English dub of Epic 7, Arowell is voiced by Miss Android 21 herself, Jeannie Tirado. You can hear her as Rose as well as Peyra in this game if you are not already aware of that. Taking a look at her stats, well, we don't really need to because it's the same stat line as Adventurer Raz, sans a couple of changes due to the differences in their rune trees. The biggest knock I'm going to have against Arowell as a character is going to be her base speed, which is 95. She does not have that 6 extra speed like Adventurer Raz would. So realistically, you're going to expect this character to be somewhere around the 200 to 210 speed range most of the time. It's going to be a bit harder, I think, for you to hit that like 230 speed range that you're accustomed to seeing Raz with the same level of bulk that he ends up having. The big change here that she has is the S3. Defensive position will change to Judgment of Light after you complete the specialty change. Judgment of Light is a single target attack that dispels all buffs from the target and has a 75 to 100% chance to stun the target based on skill ups for 1 turn. It then grants a barrier to all allies for 2 turns. Damage dealt and barrier strength increases proportional to caster's max health. Absolutely insane change to this character. So a 100% chance to single target stun on a supporting character is already really, really strong. You then get a barrier for everyone on your team for 2 turns. We know how strong that is off a character like, say, Diane. Yes, you don't get the dispel on it, but a 2-turn barrier is very, very strong as a supporting skill. Now, on top of that, it's going to have the dispel all buffs from a single target. There are 2 characters that I could think of that are played right now that have a dispel all buffs in their kit, and that is Alencia as well as Mediator Koeric, aka Hand Guy. Both of those characters are insanely strong. If you have played against Hand Guy, you already know how good his S2 actually is. It gives a barrier to your entire team, and it also removes all buffs from 1 target. That is absolutely debilitating for certain characters. Characters like Red Charlotte, for example, it completely shuts them down. If you're playing against Senya, for example, and you strip all of her buffs with Hand Guy's S2, that is completely debilitating to the character. So this is Hand Guy S2 with a stun instead of an attack down on it. And it's on a 4-turn cooldown, which is actually lower than that when we talk about it in a second. We look at the runes. Absolutely insane. And then when you look at the other rework stuff that Arowell ended up getting in that patch from a couple months back, you start to realize like just how strong this character is going to be overall. S1 has a way to strip buffs on it as well. So this is going to be a tank that is going to be very, very good at getting rid of buffs from carries. That's, in my opinion, a lot more useful than provoking somebody, having the ability to just remove buffs. If you've played against Raz, you know how frustrating it can be that his S1 sometimes can get rid of a key buff that your character needs, like an attack buff or maybe like that counter attack stance buff from Senya. I've had that dispelled on me before by a high effectiveness Raz. It's really, really frustrating. So she's not one, she's 2 buffs on the S1. And then on top of that, she has the escort change to her S2, which means that she has built-in Arius, which means she can hold Adamant Shield as her artifact, which I think is probably going to be the best option for her. And she's going to basically be a one-stop shop for mitigating an absolute ton of damage. The fact that she's going to be able to have Arius and Adamant Shield, at least to me, says that Arowell might end up actually being the game's premier damage mitigation source. She might even be better than Fallen Cecilia is just from the S2 change alone and all the stuff that we're going to talk about in the rune section. But on top of that, again, you have basically like a super juiced hand guy S2 as your S3. That is a lot of value for a 3-star. Like, we are potentially in a scenario where the best tank in the entire game might be a 3-star specialty change, which means everyone's going to have access to her. I am, as someone who plays primarily turn 2 in PvP, absolutely over the moon with the proposed changes to what we're going to be getting with this character. And if I haven't already mentioned it in this video, I think this character looks sick as hell. I think her new design is awesome. I really love the whole wolf motif. I love the wolf shield, the wolf hoodie with the ears, the wolf belt. It's super, super cool. Even her sword is like some kind of like futuristic looking like lightsaber. I think this character is absolutely like 11 out of 10 awesome. All right. Let us real quickly go over her runes so you know exactly what else you're getting on this character. So we have the Earth rune, increases her effect resistance by 15%, and then the Fruition rune gives you another 20% ER. We already talked about how good Raz was because he had 17 basically effect resistance to start in how to play Raz. This is 35. Yes, it doesn't give 5 to the entire team, but man, that's a lot, right? 35 is quite a bit to start with for free. You're probably going to want to be building this character just like we did with Adventure Raj. Again, she has the same base stats. You're going to probably want about 100% effect resistance. And because you start with this at 35 instead of 17, it's going to be quite a bit easier for you to actually end up hitting those stats. Looking at the health rune here, we're going to be getting 20% extra health as well. This is in line with Adventure Raz. So again, you can basically take how to play Adventure Raz, use my stat lines for Raz in that video, and use them for Unbound Knight Arowell. You probably will end up being a bit slower using the per piece averages, but it probably will end up working out just fine. The runes on this character, and again, them sharing the same stat line, means that they are pretty much going to be virtually identical in how you end up building them. Again, it's just going to end up being, I think, Adamant Shield overall versus Arius. Rest of the runes here, Glory Rune at the start of your turn when the caster does not have a debuff has a 20 to 30, 50, so 100% chance to increase effectiveness for one turn. Looking at this rune, you might even go higher than the 100% ER that I talked about in Adventure Raz's video. You could go 150 instead of the 50-100 split like we talked about before. So Raz would go 50% effectiveness or 65 or so in order to actually have a good chance of landing his defense break and still have some ER. Because Glory Rune gives you an increased effectiveness buff at the start of each turn as long as you're not debuffed. If you go even higher on ER to like 150 or so, there's a very good chance that you will always have Glory Rune active in a lot of your matchups. And honestly, it might be more important now that I'm thinking about it out loud that you get higher ER because you don't want to have your escort buff stripped off the character. That would be really, really bad for you because it pretty much it turns off your Arius essentially. So yeah, the more I think about it, yeah, I think you probably do want to go a bit higher on the ER, about 150 on this character, and kind of just not get the effectiveness like we talked about in how to play Adventure Raz because you're going to be getting it through this rune. Unity Rune increases the attack of light elemental allies by 10% when it's maxed out. Nice to have bonus. It's basically just going to end up being 10% extra attack on your Arowell most of the time, I feel like, though. These kinds of rune passives usually don't end up working out. Aiden has several of these throughout her various different forms, and it's kind of just whatever. They don't really have super big game impact most of the time. Guard Rune, at the start of the battle, grants a barrier proportional to 15% of the caster's max health to light elemental allies for 2 turns. Basically, if you draft a full light team for PvE, then you're going to essentially have a Fallen Cecilia with this character. Otherwise, she herself is just going to start with a barrier for 2 turns most of the time. And then if you have an extra light character, like say a Sage Vivian, for example, is probably the most common one I could think of, or like AOL or Solitaria, then yeah, the Guard Rune will end up proccing for those characters, which could be helpful. This is both a blessing and a curse because of characters like Desert Jewel Bazaar, who is completely destroying the meta right now. And then obviously you have Operator Cigarette. So it's going to end up being very much a similar scenario to Fallen Cecilia. You're going to have the same bad matchups that character has and the same good matchups that character has for the most part. Moving on to the Relic Rune, it increases the damage on Judgment of Light by 10%. This is fairly standard. If you remember from How to Play Adventure Raz, a lot of his runes just give extra damage that isn't really super useful. Even like Aiden specialty changes have things like this. It's just basically filler for the most part. It's kind of a way for them to adjust the damage on the character without actually affecting the multipliers. The more important one, though, for Judgment of Light is the Achievement Rune. After using Judgment of Light, when the target is stunned, has a 100% chance to decrease skill cooldowns by 1 turn. That means that you're getting the super juiced Hand Guy S2 with the stun on a 3-turn cooldown, assuming that you actually land the stun on the character. Really, really nuts. Most carries in this game do not really build ER for the most part. So you're going to have a very, very high chance of stunning a character with this for sure. I'm just going to keep gushing about how insanely good this S3 is and how good and complete this character's kit actually is. Really nuts, Rune. Can't believe they gave her this one. If you can get her turn cycling up with other characters on your team, like say like an Amelia, or give her a speed buff from a character like Landy, and she just starts zooming around the map, then you're going to be spamming a lot of Judgment of Lights over the course of a game with this thing, assuming that you're actually able to land the stun buff, which you probably should, because you should be having that effectiveness buff at the start of every single turn. Last 2 runes here to talk about are on her S1 Shield Thrust. Harvest Rune makes it so that there is a 100% chance that she recovers 5% of her health every time she uses her S1. Makes her an excellent candidate for counter set with this rune, because you're going to be healing a ton every time you end up countering. The character is going to be very, very bulky, very hard to get off the board in general. If you are able to actually reliably use the S1 either through counter or through, again, really high turn cycling, this character is just going to be really, really good with this rune. And then the Speed Rune, when using Shield Thrust, the S1, you increase the combat radius of Arowell by 10%. This is literally the same rune that Raz has for his X-Slash in his kit when we talked about How to Play Adventure Raz. So yeah, that's going to be it for talking about the runes and everything else about the character. It should be fairly obvious throughout this video. Again, I'm super stoked about this character. I think this character is very good, and there is a strong, you can mark my words, there's a strong possibility that this character is going to be the meta tank. I can't see this character not being very good with built-in Arius, can hold Adamant Shield, which is a very strong artifact that doesn't really have a home right now in this meta. She has a bunch of strips built into the kit, and again, that super juiced Hand Guy S2. If Valencia is coveted for her strip, defense buff, and damage, and Hand Guy is coveted for his utility and things like the strip, and then I think Arowell is just going to slot pretty much right alongside those characters as well. Right now, the way that the meta is kind of shaking up, Raz is pretty much the best Arius holder, and then there is like Fallen Cecilia if you have Desert Jewel Bazaar or he's pre-man, or there is like Shadow Knight Phyllis in certain scenarios. There isn't really a strong other contested knight that can be a massive damage mitigation source. I think Arowell is going to slot right in there again. I am very confident that this is going to be a meta character. I would be incredibly shocked if I was wrong on my prediction on this one. The character just on paper has a lot of overlap with some of the very best characters that we currently have in the format in terms of things like stats, utility, and whatnot, for me to not really feel that way. If you feel differently, though, let me know down in the comments below. Would love to hear more from you guys. The Inferno Kawazu guide that I have been working on has been kind of, sidetracked. I've had a insanely crazy last week or so. If you were paying attention to my Discord yesterday, you guys already know what happened. That will probably end up getting delayed probably to sometime this weekend, because I still have a number of other things going on in my life that I have to take care of first and foremost. And then there's also the end of the RTA season. So if I am going to be focusing my efforts on Epic 7, I am just trying to make sure I just lock in that Emperor again for the end of the season. So I hope you guys will understand. I will try to get it out and make it up to you as soon as I possibly can. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye now.